Hey folks, Mike Avila here. It's been a while since I've done one of these comic book centric videos, but I believe some of you may remember me from my days with Sci-Fi doing Behind the Panel, where I talked to all sorts of people in the comic book industry about their jobs, their careers, and likes and dislikes and everything else. I was a huge fan, like many people were, of the great Gerry Conway, who just passed away at the age of 73. Broke into the business as a teenager, selling scripts before he was old enough to drink, writing for the Avengers, Thor, and of course the Amazing Spider-Man, where he upended the entire industry when he wrote The Night Gwen Stacy Died, which was published in Amazing Spider-Man 21 and 122. I had the pleasure of talking to Gerry quite a few times over the years, including once for a very in-depth interview about his career that we turned into a really cool video Behind the Panel about Ross Andru, his partner on Amazing Spider-Man for several years. He and I agreed that Ross Andru is one of the most criminally underrated comic book artists of the Bronze Age. He was just an amazing artist and storyteller, and Gerry was very kind to give me almost a half hour of time to defend, step up to shore up the legacy of one of his creative partners and somebody he called a friend, and somebody who he felt deserved to have more credit given to him for the impact he had on the wall crawler and on the title that so many people call their favorite, Amazing Spider-Man. I decided to put together a little video based on that conversation I had with Gerry about Ross Andru. Hope you guys enjoy it. Almost never is one of those names that comes up, and I wonder why, because he has such a great body of work.
Well, part of it is what was fashionable during the Bronze Age. The dominant visual style that was fashionable was influenced heavily by Neal Adams, which was this semi-realistic, almost newspaper strip style of art that Neal was the first out of the box. And a lot of the younger artists followed him, were influenced by him. In the mid-'80s, when people like Frank Miller came along and brought back a more cartoony sort of approach. So in the 70s, it was even the case of Neal actively redrawing some of Ross's work on the Superman Spider-Man book, which was an act of really grotesque, arrogance on Neal's part that none of us were aware of when he did it.
Really? Like John has a couple of really important pages, and he told me like a bunch of different work on it and whatnot, but redrew some of Ross's work.
Yeah. He redrew figures of Superman because he didn't agree with Ross's interpretation. I mean, that's just arrogance. It's just pure, unadulterated, artistic arrogance and an insult to an artist.
You were the writer of the book. Had you seen the pages before they were redrawn?
I wasn't the editor of the book, Carmine and Stan Lee. I approved the penciling, and, we gave the book to Dick Giordano to ink. And the reason a lot of hands were involved was because Dick had a studio that he had in collaboration with Neal, called Continuity Associates. And Dick would farm out backgrounds and have assistants work on different parts of the page while he was inking the main figures. It wasn't really something where you could track, this happened or that happened. But then later we found out that Neal had just come in and decided he was going to redraw stuff. As I said, just an act of utter disrespect and arrogance on Neal's part.
Was Ross offended by that?
I imagine he was, but he was such a polite guy that I doubt that he would have said anything. I imagine he was. I think Ross recognized that he was not. He was a very, very mild-mannered, gentle man and a gentleman, very loyal to his friends. He was loyal to the point of some defeating to Mike Esposito, who's on his work. Ross kept him on as his anchor.
Do you think his mild-mannered nature is that part of the reason why he's been taken for granted for a while? I think it's slowly coming around, at least in original art collecting circles. I know for a fact his work is revered now, But do you think the fact that he was very mild-mannered and polite, do you think that kind of hurt him in terms of his story?
No, absolutely, because Ross was as I say, a gentleman. And I think that the fact that he did not clamor for attention and did not demand attention the way that some other artists of that time did, didn't promote himself, and also was a bit of a holdover from an earlier time. His work, he started working back in the 50s, and was considered throughout the 50s and 60s as a second tier artist because of the books that he was working on. Terrific war.
I love Star Spangled War stories.
Yeah. Metal Man was a terrific book, and Wonder Woman, but they were all just this side of campy. His work is much richer than that.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, I discovered him on Amazing Spider-Man. He was probably the first artist that I probably ever saw his work in an Amazing Spider-Man book, because that was right around the time when you guys wrote the book that I started reading it, and gone and read his war stuff and his Wonder Woman stuff. His style evolved to where he could still do fun stuff, because you guys had some fun, silly things in your run. Hello, Spider-Mobile. But he did the melodrama and the romance of the book as well as anybody had done besides John Romita. Like, to me, I thought that was one of the great things, that he could make a scene between Peter and Mary Jane as compelling as anybody.
Yes. I mean, he was a master storyteller, which is a skill set that a lot of artists do not have today. Many artists are trained primarily as draftsmen, design and layout. Storytelling is something that you almost have to have an instinctive gift for, because it's hard to teach storytelling. Engagement with the scenes and the characters more difficult. One of the reasons I think children's graphic novels are as successful as they are is because those artists are storytellers. They are not attempting to be fine draftsmen. They're attempting to convey emotion and that experience. And that's something that Ross excelled at, emotional response. And that's got nothing to do with your draftsmanship.
Well,
He's a crappy draftsman and sell jokes. The artist manages to get across the emotions of the characters as he's telling those little stories in 4 panels. Ross, because he was of that old school where the emphasis was primarily on telling stories, and also he did do a couple of humor magazines that he and Mike Esposito co-created.
Sure.
Rip-offs of Mad Magazine and the like. He had this sense of the absurd and silliness that is based on an empathy with human emotions. That's where storytelling comes in.
I want to ask you about, because back then you were writing like a dozen books a month.
Something like it, yes.
You were doing a ton, especially when you were on Amazing Spider-Man, and you were doing Marvel style scripting.
Yes.
Okay. How much leeway were you able to give Ross?
Yeah.
Because you knew you could trust him to figure it out.
Oh yeah. I mean, we would actually, after a while, I don't think I even gave Ross written plots. We would talk through a story together. Rarely would they go into much detail. If I had an idea for a scene or something like that, specifically, I might write something down for it. The Superman Spider-Man book, we plotted that out together like 5 or 6 pages at a time in action and exposition and story, all of that, so that they'd have an equal impact. And we did that by focusing in on those set pieces together.
Right.
So he was very much a story collaborator with me. But when at one point we'd have a fight on top of the elevated train going into Flushing, which then ended up in, I think, Spider-Man 2, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2.
Right.
New York City.
A question about that, because I think one of his great lasting legacies to the character of Spider-Man is that he helped define him as New York's preeminent superhero. He was already in New York since the beginning, but it didn't pay as much as you saw in the 70s books once Andru came out. Why was that? Was that something that just developed because he was interested in geographically and topography and being accurate with the topography? Or was that something you and him did?
Yeah, actually, it was very specific. Ross really loved working for reference, and he was a photographer. So he even came to my apartment building at one point. We had dinner together. He came out of my apartment. We went up on the roof and took pictures from the roof. So there are scenes that are set on the roof of my apartment building. I mean, it's that kind of detail. He would go to places and take pictures, and it got us into trouble at one point. We had we did a character called the Mindworm that was set in a house at a remote location of Howard Beach, Queens. And it was supposed to be a fictional house, but Ross found a really great looking house that looked terrific. And he took pictures of it and used it as reference. And the owner of the house started getting people coming to his house asking if he used the Mindworm. Be a little bit less explicit about where things were located after that.
But it was always great.
Part of the joy was doing New York.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I lived in New York for 15 years in the comics, and I just took it for granted. That's how New York looked. And then I moved there, and then it does look like it with the water towers and the buildings. It was really informative for readers that were outside of New York to get an accurate depiction of the city. The Superman Spider-Man comic, why was Ross selected as the artist?
Well, there was the official reason, and then there was the real reason. The real reason was I wanted to work with the backing of Carmine to work with whoever I wanted to work with. And the contract had been set up was that DC would provide the writer and Marvel would provide the artist. And Marvel provided Roy Thomas as a consultant on the book because Len Wein and Marv Wolfman, who were the editors at Marvel at the time, didn't really want to get involved with the book, but they wanted to keep a step back. From my own selfish point of view, I knew that Ross would be a terrific artist, but from a official point of view, he made perfect sense as an artist who had actually drawn both characters. You know, he had drawn Superman and he had drawn Spider-Man. So this is why I want Ross away from Spider-Man for a couple of months.
Oh, that's right around that.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's fascinating. So, Gerry, a specific issue of your time working with Ross that kind of is the definitive Ross Andru book for you. This is a great example of his artistry.
I would say that the introduction of the tarantula and Spider-Man are fighting, and it goes over multiple panels on one page. And it's one rooftop, and each panel is, you're following them as they're fighting from one panel to the next, but it's all on the same rooftop at the same perspective. And each panel is just moved the characters around on the rooftop. I thought that was just a wonderful example of cinematic storytelling that Ross would do.
Wow. It's funny that you can point to that right away. I'm digging through my omnibus right now trying to get to that page.
I could be completely wrong. And then I would say, well, Sal also was an excellent artist at that time.
You're talking about when the tarantula was introduced, that was with the Punisher, right?
The Punisher was in 74. I think this was the same year. It might be towards the end of my run. I'm not really sure when the tarantula initially came out, but it's in that. I mean, I only wrote Spider-Man in that period for about 3 years. So we're only talking about 36, 40 issues.
He cared greatly for Ross. Where does he rank with the Spider-Man art? You're right.
Well, Ditko first. He is the guy who defined the character and created him visually. To me, the definitive Spider-Man, because that's the first Spider-Man I encountered. Romita, I think, is a solid second. I'd say he was tied with Ross as the definitive second.
That is high praise. That is about as high praise you can, because not only is Romita a fantastic artist, but he's also a gem of a person. Maybe the only person in comics that, of all the people I've talked to, nobody has ever said anything but great things about John Romita.
Well, he's one of a kind, and his legacy is tremendous. I mean, there's nobody else like John. So he, at the very least, is the senior partner in a number two with Ross.
Last question for you: when you and Ross were on Amazing Spider-Man, where did it rank in terms of sales for Marvel?
I know that Spider-Man was one of their best-selling books, but probably right up there with Avengers. I know that it sold better than Fantastic Four at that point because the FF was sliding a bit.
It was sliding, but it was definitely one of the top books.
Yeah, yeah, because the way you can tell is how many variations were there of the book. And there was Spider-Man, and then there was Marvel Team Up with Spider-Man. So there were two books that featured Spider-Man, which is a clear sign that the character is one of their top selling characters.
God.
Even at the time, we didn't really have access.
Even you, the guy who was briefly editor-in-chief?
Yeah, you would be told numbers, but you didn't know whether those were real numbers or not. It would simply say, sales have gone up or sales slipped. Or you knew you were in trouble when they cut the page count. That's when you knew you were in trouble.
Gotcha.
And they cut the page count across the board in the early 70s, mid 70s.
And they went down to like 19 or 18 pages or something?
Yeah, they went to 18 pages, and then they even basically reduced it to 17 pages by making one of the pages a 2-page spread. So you would be paid for one page that was being published as 2 pages. It was really cheesy.
Comic book math. Those double-page spreads now from those Bronze Age books, the original pages go for tons of money.
I bet. So weird.
Well,
I just wish that the original artists were receiving.
I'm hoping to get a quote from an art dealer about the Andru art market, because I know not even 10 years ago you could have found prime era Ross Andru pages for $500. Now you'll be lucky to find one for less than $4,000. That helps. So visually appealing. One of the things that I'm mentioning in my piece is how you guys were on the book at a time when Spider-Man's national profile was really solidifying him into becoming a mainstream icon, right? You had the Electric Company shorts, which is how somebody like me, who was a little kid at the time, discovered him first. And then you had, for 2 years, that crappy live-action series.
Right.
So, and all the merchandising in the mid to late 70s. So you guys were really on the book at a time when the profile of the character was raised. And then you had this very visually appealing rendition of the character. I mean, that Spider-Man was muscular, but not too muscular. He wasn't weird like McFarlane's, right? So I think all that combined. I'm reading through the stories again just for this. And I want to read one issue, and then I end up reading 6 for my reprint. Because they're really good stories, and they read well, and they look great. So,
Yeah.
Best compliment I could give you.
Thank you. I'm glad that you're doing this piece on Ross, because the guy just needs to be recognized as an iconic figure in comics.
So that was my conversation with Gerry Conway about his creative partner on Amazing Spider-Man and on the legendary Superman vs. Amazing Spider-Man #1, an all-time classic book and an industry game changer. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Gerry Conway, may he rest in peace, but his legacy is secure and people will remember Gerry